This next section of the video is about the diagnostic criteria and eligibility for students with EBDs. So in order for a child to receive an IEP or a 504 plan, they must first be diagnosed by a school psychologist. The first step of the diagnosis is the screening process, in which the psychologist checks if a child has an EBD, is at risk for an EBD, or has troubling behaviors but is not likely to develop an EBD. Some of the screening procedures are the child behavior checklist, which is a 112 question list that asks about feelings and behaviors of a child. The answers that one could give are not true, somewhat true, or very true. And these checklists can be done by parents, teachers, or the student themselves. I believe when I was diagnosed by my school psychologist that I was given this form of screening. But I never received special education for my disability because it was very late when I was finally diagnosed. The next screening possibility scale, the behavior and emotional rating scale, which assesses the strengths of students in areas of interpersonal skills, family involvement, interpersonal skills, school functioning, and affective strengths. So from taking this screening, psychologists are really able to create intervention that focuses on both the strengths and the weaknesses that are given through this scale. Once a child has been screened, they move on to assessment. One of the most common assessments for determining eligibility of EBDs is the functional behavioral assessment, which is a systematic process for gathering information to understand why a student may be engaging in behaviors. And a big part of this assessment is the why. So there are three different parts of this assessment. The first is direct measurements during observation. So psychologists would measure the frequency, how many times an observed behavior occurs, the duration, how long a child is engaged in an activity, whether it is how long they're doing their worksheet. Most often for people with EBDs, it'd be a shorter time than a typical child, or a tantrum on the other scale, which would be much longer than a typical child. Latency, the time between the opportunity to respond and a behavior. So if we go to the worksheet example, if a teacher gives an instruction, opportunity to respond, and the behavior of a child doing the worksheet. So that may take longer for a child with EBD. I work at a tutoring center with some students, and I know one of them really struggles with doing that exact process I just described. I'll give an instruction, and I'll just wait for him to do it because sometimes it'll take 20 seconds, other times it'll take 5 minutes for him to start. And on the other hand, a quick response, a quick latency for a child with EBD might be if a child is tapping and making a noise, and a child with an EBD doesn't like that. He may be very quick to react and snap at that other child by yelling, hitting, throwing a chair, whatever manner he decides to use. The next would be topography, the form of behaviors, which are different than typical behaviors. And lastly, magnitude, the size of the reactions. And those are all under the direct measurements during observation. Another form of FBA is indirect. So questionnaires, scales like the motivation assessment scale, and interviews like functional analysis. And then in these interviews, they really try to figure out why behaviors occur. Like really what the antecedent events are that trigger behaviors. And lastly, in the functional analysis piece, psychologists change antecedents and consequences to determine the purpose of an action. And that is how a child with EBD can be determined eligible and then given special education.